Hey guys, welcome to the 3.7 review video. So we are working on the Unit 3 Part 2 review. I've already done all the complex number stuff. Now I'm going to do completing the square and a quadratic formula with you. So for completing the square, it might be a good idea to write one of these examples on a note card, okay? If you want a quick note that might be easy to add, you are going to add b over 2 squared to both sides. Then you are going to factor and square root. Okay, that probably makes not a lot of sense for you right now if you don't remember how to do it, but it will in just a second. So I'm going to start with number 18. I'm going to subtract that 19 to the other side because I want the only thing left on the left side to be x's. Then I need to add a number to make this factorable on the left side. That's why we had to get rid of the 19. In order to do that, I'm going to take half of this number. So half of -2 is -1 squared. If you are typing that in a calculator, you must use parentheses. -1 squared is 1. So I'm going to add 1 to both sides. That's why I said add b over 2, or half of b, squared to both sides. Half of b is -1, -1 squared is 1. You can't just add it to one side of an equation, you have to add it to both. The reason we did that is because now, if we're factoring, we're looking for two numbers that multiply to 1 and add to -2. And those two numbers happen to be -1 and -1. And instead of leaving it like that, we're actually going to write it as x minus 1 squared. Because that is x minus 1 squared. It's being multiplied by itself. And then over here, -19 plus 1 is -18. And then we are going to take the square root on both sides. And when I do that, I'm going to get x minus 1 equals plus or minus the square root of 18. Before I go too much further, I'm going to simplify that square root of 18. And 18 is 9 times 2. And the square root of 9 is 3. Now, hopefully you're wondering where I put that negative. I left it off for a second because whenever you get a negative under the square root, it is possible to do that if you have an I. So as long as you put an I in your answer, that's your way of saying, hey, I took the square root of a negative to get here. And then the 2 is left underneath the square root. And then last but not least, we need to get rid of this 1 by adding it. When you do that, it is easiest to put it right here in front of the plus minus sign. So you get 1 plus or minus 3i square roots of 2. Okay, completing the square is a way of making sure that this side factors into something squared like this. So that then you can take the square root on both sides. That's the whole idea. All right, number 19. I only want x's left on this side, so I'm going to add that 3 over here. And I get x squared plus 14x. Leave a little bit of space because you're going to need to write a number there, equals 8. Then I need to do half of 14, which is 7 squared. And that, my friends, is 49. So I need to add 49 to both sides, like so. Over here, in the parentheses being squared, is the number that got squared to make the 49. And that number happens to be positive 7. Notice how over here, since half of -2 was -1, it was a -1. Since half of 14 is 7, it's 7. If this was negative 14, this would be negative 7. So just be careful, watch out for that. And on the opposing side, 49 plus 8 is 57. And then we're going to take the square root on both sides. And guess what, guys? It's our lucky day because this square root does not simplify. So what we're going to do is write x plus 7 equals plus and minus. Don't forget that when you're doing the square root on both sides. Square root of 57. Nothing changes. You can't simplify that. There's no I because it's not negative. Now you just need to subtract the 7 to the other side, and it goes right in front of the plus and minus sign. All right, now let's talk about the quadratic formula. It might be a good idea to have the quadratic formula on a note card. It will not be on the test. Some of you told me that quadratic formula is your favorite, probably because it's the most straightforward, but you have to have that formula, otherwise you are out of luck. Okay. So, once again, that will not be given on the test. If you would like to use it, write it on a note card, use 2 SOAR points. You're good to go. So, when you're starting off the problem, first of all, make sure that this is 0. It is, so we're good to go. A is the number in front of x squared, B is the number in front of x, and C is the constant. What you need to do is, off to the side, I would find b squared minus 4ac first, because then you can do it by hand and it's a little bit more accurate than the way you might type it in the calculator. So negative 10 squared is 100. Any number squared is positive. Your calculator will tell you otherwise if you don't type in the correct parentheses. Minus 4 times 2 times 5. Okay, 4 times 2 is 8. 8 times 5 is 40. And we have a total of 60 right here. 60 is the number that goes inside my square root. Negative b goes out front. B is already negative 10, so when I add another negative, that makes it positive. And on the bottom, 2 times a. A is already 2, so 2 times 2 is 4. Now let's talk simplifying. That's the hardest part of the quadratic formula. I need to find 2 numbers that multiply to 60, that one of which is a perfect square. So let's see, 4 is our first perfect square. 4 goes into 60 15 times. So I'm going to rewrite this as 4 times 15, which really makes this the square root of 4 times the square root of 15, which is 2 square roots of 15. Okay, again, I'm getting this 2 because I did the square root of 4. So really, I have 10 plus or minus 2 square roots of 15 over 4. At the very end of a problem, check and make sure, is there anything you can divide these 3 numbers out front by? You don't have to worry about the 15 because it is inside of a square root, so it doesn't count. I can divide all these by 2, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. That gives me 5 plus or minus square root of 15 over 2. 10 divided by 2 is 5. 2 divided by 2 is 1, so I'm just not even going to write it. And 4 divided by 2 is 2. And that's your final answer. And on the second one, 7x squared plus 5x minus 1. First thing you're going to do is b squared minus 4ac. B squared is 5 squared, which is 25, minus 4 times 7 times negative 1. Okay, A is 7, B is 5, C is negative 1. This is negative 4 times 7, that's negative 28. Negative 28 times -1 is positive 28. And 25 plus 28 is a good old 53. Good news for you, good news for me. 53 doesn't have any numbers that go into it, so we're not going to have to simplify the square root. Negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, which is 53, over 2a. 2 times 7 is 14. Since this can't simplify, there's not a number I can divide all the numbers out front by. That is your final answer. Okay, now I'm going to show you how to solve each equation below using any method and kind of talk to you about which one you should pick. Okay, so as you approach a problem, count the number of terms. This one has 1, 2, 3. That means you might be able to factor it. Factoring is a good place to start on it. Okay, so here you'll be looking for two numbers that multiply to 16 and add to 17. That's a 16 and 1. And you get to go straight to parentheses, like that. And from here, you need to know what number plus 16 will give you 0. That's negative 16. And what number plus 1 will give you 0? Negative 1. These are always going to be the opposites coming out of the factors. If you only see two terms in a problem like this, and it's missing the x's, then you want to probably use square root. Because if you subtract that 49 to the other side, then you get 9x squared equals 49, divide by 9. It doesn't divide nicely, so we're just going to leave it as a fraction for right now. And you can just use the square root to get x all by itself. So you don't have to worry about this factoring or completing the square or quadratic formula. You can just square root both sides right here. Don't forget your plus and minus though. Then, square root of 49 is 7 over the square root of 9 is 3. But what did we do with the negative? Isn't that negative? Yes, that means you have an I with it. Anytime you see a square root or a square root with a negative inside, there is an I in the answer to it. It is possible, it just has an I. Unless you photomath it, and then it's going to tell you it's not possible. Better watch out. Okay, if there are parentheses with a squared on the outside, you're gonna want to square root those two. Okay, that's really the only way to solve these because you can't get that 3 out of the parentheses until you get rid of the 2. And the only way to cancel out a power of 2 is to square root both sides. I'm going to move through this one a little bit quicker. I'm subtracting this 72 to the other side. Then I'm going to divide by 2. And then I'm going to take the square root. X plus 3 equals plus and minus the square root of negative 36. Well, the square root of 36 is 6. And since it had a negative, that's 6i. And then you move that 3 to the other side. When you want to do that, you have to make it negative. And there you go. All right, so let's talk about 25 for a second. For 25, you can factor this. You can multiply 2 times 3, 6. There are two numbers that multiply to 6 and add to 7. But a lot of people don't like this one to factor. So we're going to use quadratic formula for it, okay? I'm not going to complete the square. I'm going to go ahead and say that completing the square only works well if the middle number is even. Because you have to divide it by 2 and square it. I don't want to do 7 divided by 2 squared. That's a fraction. That's a decimal. Ugh. So moving on, this would be my A, B, my C. I'm going to go ahead and do quadratic formula because let's say I'd rather do that than factor. It is factorable though. Let's see, b squared minus 4ac. b squared is 7 squared, that's 49, minus 4 times 2 times 3. A is 2, c is 3. Negative 4 times 2 is negative 8. Negative 8 times 3 is negative 24. And look at that, we get 25. That is what goes under our square root. We're going to do negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, which is 25, over 2a, which is 4, because a is 2. Now, guys, the square root of 25 is 5. So we're going to cross this out and write 5. And I need to do negative 7 plus 5, which is 12. No, sorry, negative 2 over 4. And negative 7 minus 5, which is negative 12 over 4. 2 over 4 is negative 1/2. And negative 12 divided by 4 is negative 3. If the quadratic formula simplifies all the way down to whole numbers like this, guess what that means? You could have factored it. If there are square roots left, that means you couldn't have. Okay. All right. And next up, x squared minus 3x minus 70. If there is no number in front of x squared and there are 3 terms, I highly recommend factoring. It is probably the easiest method. Negative 70 is 10 times 7. And 10 minus 7 is 3. Since we want it to be negative 3, we need negative 10 plus 7. Which means our answers are 10 and negative 7. Now, let me prove to you that the quadratic formula works. I'm going to solve this one by quadratic formula 2. A would be 1, B would be negative 3, C would be negative 70. B squared minus 4ac. B squared is negative 3 squared, which is 9, minus 4 times 1 times negative 70. That turns into positive 280. So 280 plus 9 is 289. And folks, I don't know what the square root of 289 is, but I'm about to do it in a second. Okay, negative b becomes negative 3, becomes positive 3. Plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, the thing we just got, over 2a. A is 1, 2 times 1 is 2. B square root of 289 is 17. So we get 3 plus 17, which is 20 over 2, and 3 minus 17, which is negative 14 over 2. And guess what? Negative 14 over 2 is negative 7. 20 over 2 is 10. But look which one took way less work. Factor if you can. If you get stuck with a problem like number 27, where not everything's on the same side, your first goal, your first order of business, is to get everything on the same side. Okay, now you'll realize I'm kind of writing this other negative 24 rogue. It doesn't really have anything to add to. So instead, 3x squared minus 2x squared is 1x squared plus 5x. The negative 24 just kind of tags along to the end. Now I need two numbers that multiply to negative 24 and add to 5. That's 8 and negative 3. So my final answers are negative 8 and 3. Voila. Okay, notice how I didn't choose completing the square on any of these? That's because that's really only what you should do if it's not factorable. And all of these were factorable except for these two. And I decided not to complete the square on this one because it doesn't have anything in the middle. And this one had the weird parentheses. If you see the parentheses, you're going to want to square root that no matter what. Okay. Basically, use the square root if you have something in parentheses squared, or x squared plus a number. So there's no x's in the middle, that's square root. Factoring is if you have x squared, x, and a number, like this. And then if the middle number is even, you could complete the square. But you still want this to look something like this. Just if that middle number is even, instead of factoring, you could do that. Or if this doesn't work out, okay? And the quadratic formula, you can only use that if there are no parentheses, okay? I am going to make you one last note on factoring before I stop this video, and that is that when you are factoring, you want to multiply to the last number, add to the middle number. Okay, that might be a good reminder to throw it on there.